more circular considerations or more, RCRA stuff that the state might.
So generally, ecology has RCRA, EPA has CERCLA, it's that way.
That is the way it should be, yes. Yes.
Does NERDA figure into this at all, natural resource damages assessments, as it does in the Portland Harbor Superfund side?
What's that?
NERDA, natural resource damages assessments.
Mhm.
EPA doesn't really participate in the natural resource damage assessment at Hanford
I know it's NOAA, but it is part of,
and US Fish and Wildlife
yeah, it is part of the,
and
I just wonder if that's happening.
Yes. So,
that's
At Hanford?
yeah.
Oh,
I represent Oregon.
that's fine.
Nice.
okay, any other questions for?
We
We will indulge you just this much.
Okay, guess of this. Dave, you said that the people carries the leader change for the chromium, right?
Micrograms.
Or actually, it's micrograms. We come to a 5-year review at the end, and now it's more stringent than the regularly closed on with the law. What happens? Are we actually going to go back and take what
What's gonna happen is we will look at the information. So basically, we did not have and there was no slope factor for cancer slope factor for hexavalent chromium. And now we have one. So now we're gonna have to look at the risk assessment, look at the actions. And so the 5-year review can say, one of the questions is there new toxicity? Yes, okay. We're gonna have to put in an action to look at that, evaluate those past decisions and say, does something need to change? Do we need to extend the time for institution controls? Do we need to start a bump and treat? Do we need to take out more soil? Whatever it may be. I can't presuppose the answer, but those are the options on the table.
Okay, thanks, David. So we're out of time. Thank you very much for a good presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Now, Ryan and Stephanie, welcome back to
Are you okay?
the
Can we sit here?
Oregon Board.
Can we sit here versus standing?
Hey, Chair, I got a quick question on questions. Earlier, of course, the folks online were wanting to, talk to DOE and these things, and I'm not suggesting we change the agenda or the way we go about things, but in the likelihood that I'm not able to answer their question this afternoon, I wonder if there's a mechanism where if somebody's interfacing, it's likely they'll drop off, right? I mean, if they're able to ask the questions, then we can get those questions out to the board
Yes.
and forward them on to
Right.
the appropriate
Yeah,
folks.
so if it's a question for DOE, we will leave that with Gary, and Mark and I will expect to get a response back and reroute it to the board.
But it would be great to announce that to people who are waiting and will have to leave that they can.
But there's a portal or somebody, somehow they can reach out and get those questions.
Please.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Stephanie Schley. I introduced myself at the beginning, but I'm the Nuclear Waste Program Manager at Washington State Department of Ecology. And I have with me Ryan Miller, who is our Communications Manager at the Nuclear Waste Program, probably a familiar face to many of you. And I also have some folks online that I wanted to introduce in anticipation of you maybe having some more detailed questions. Wanted to be able to be as responsive as possible to those. So online, I have Edward Holbrook, who is the Acting Deputy Program Manager at the Nuclear Waste Program. Should also have Suzanne Dahl, who is our Tank Waste Treatment Section Manager. So any waste treatment plant questions, she's our expert. And also Teresa Howell, who I'll turn the presentation over to a little later to talk about ongoing tri-party agreement negotiations, as well as to give you an overview of the structure of the tri-party agreement. I think that's everyone from Ecology online. And What?
You got a whole mess of books.
Oh, I got lives to listen to.
Okay.
So, Stephanie, could I just interrupt for a moment? So we're going to have a working lunch today, starting around noon, but they'll be setting up over the next, half hour or so. Certainly everyone in this room is invited to partake. But let's, try to hold our appetites till noon and then, we'll take it from there.
Sounds great. So a little bit about our agency before I get into the agenda. I heard there are some new folks here at the board. So at Washington State Department of Ecology, overall, our agency represents Washington State on environmental matters. We have about 1,600 employees. My director is governor appointed. We are a cabinet agency, so we work very closely with the Washington State Governor's office on any matter related to Hanford. Our program, the Nuclear Waste Program, we're in charge of implementing the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, Clean Air Act requirements, Clean Water Act requirements that apply on the Hanford site, as well as any other agency or entity that has a hazardous waste radiological component, hence why our title is Nuclear Waste Program. Hanford is our biggest permittee, facility operator that we work with, that we regulate. We also regulate Permafix Northwest. We have a permit with them, as well as Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and Bremerton, and provide support to the Energy Facilities Site Evaluation Council, another Washington State agency, in their oversight of the Columbia Generating Station. We also have responsibility for the U.S. Ecology site that's out on the Hanford site as well. With that, I think you can go to the next slide in the outline. So we'll talk about general updates, Hanford site funding. We'll provide you an update of our Hanford site-wide permit. We'll talk a little bit about where we're at in discussions with the Department of Energy on T101, the single shelf tank that Brian spoke about earlier today. We also have a couple of slides on environmental testing of low activity waste, the permit requirement, as well as, like I said, status of tri-party agreement negotiations. Slide. General update. So the first one, and I heard a little bit of discussion on this morning too, responding to Testbed Initiative Holistic Agreement Communications. The governor's office and my director received various letters recently from the mayor of Spokane, as well as the Spokane City Council, regarding concerns about transportation of liquid waste through Spokane. There was some misrepresentation of information, maybe is a good way to say it, in those letters, and Brian did a good job clarifying that this morning. We responded to both of those letters and trying to clarify that Testbed Initiative is 2,000 gallons of waste. Brian gave status of where that is. Department of Ecology's role in Testbed Initiative was issuing Department of Energy a research, development, and demonstration permit to pre-treat 2,000 gallons of that waste on the Hanford site. Department of Energy is responsible for transporting that waste to the final treatment and disposal facilities. Those will be in Utah and Texas. They did make the decision to transport that waste in liquid form. Right now, that is the only decision out there that speaks to liquid waste transportation in respect to Hanford waste. Not to be confused with, as Brian said, the holistic agreement and what was out there for the holistic agreement most recently. That public comment period ended on September 1st. I'll talk about it a little later. That covers and will cover a very similar process for pre-treating 22 tanks worth of low activity waste at the Hanford site. Department of Energy will, the agreement right now in holistic says by the end of this calendar year, decide whether they're going to drop that waste locally on the Hanford site, local community, and then ship grouted waste, or whether they're going to ship the waste in liquid form. We received many public comments on that that we're taking into consideration as we respond to the holistic agreement. So that was essentially the various communications, what they were about that we had with the Mayor of Spokane, Spokane City Council. We sent responses to both the Mayor of Spokane, both the Spokane City Council. Department of Energy recently issued their response to the Mayor of Spokane, and I know Dave's counterparts at the RCRA program issued responses to both the Mayor and City Council. Again, really just clarifying what the decision that has been made now in relation to Testbed Initiative, and then what the future decision will be and the opportunities for public comment for that future decision around waste transportation. I know that was a lot, and that's just the first bullet. We're covering a lot of really meaty topics here today. It's great. Ryan, is there anything that you'd add on communications around that?
You covered.
Okay. All right. Staffing update. So on our Hanford Advisory Board and Oregon Board meetings of the last few years, we've provided some pretty robust staffing updates. And I think in part that's been because Ecology has really struggled to hire and retain folks, but I'm really excited to say that we're doing really well with our positions and staffing right now. Fully staffed, our program is around 90 positions. I do have a couple of, as I introduced Eddie, he's in an acting role right now. And I have another manager who's acting on the management team, so looking to fill those roles. And Ryan now has a robust communications team. Do you want to speak to that?
We do. We had two vacancies. We had a new position that was newly established earlier this year, and then one vacancy from our communications team that worked with our program for 20 years. And we recently filled both positions. We have a fully staffed communications outreach team, so you'll be seeing a lot of them all over the place along with me doing communications outreach. So yeah, we're fully staffed and ready to rock. Right in time for Rep 9, the Southwide permit, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. So then continuing on down, some other updates. We completed recently the public comment period on the Newcon Research Development Demonstration Permit, and we're responding to those comments now. Also pretty noteworthy is we've completed our permitting on the integrated disposal facility. And why that's important is Brian spoke about the status of starting to treat tank waste at the Hanford site, the low activity fraction of the tank waste. That's supposed to start happening in summer next year. Vitrified low activity waste will be disposed of in the RCRA permitted integrated disposal facility. So our efforts in going through and modifying that permit to allow Department of Energy to start storing waste there is pretty noteworthy. So just want to mention that. And Suzanne and her team did a phenomenal job at getting those permits completed for us and working with the Department of Energy, including through an appeal. Other upcoming opportunities for public comment. Ryan, do you want to speak to the first one?
Sure. This first one's not necessarily a public comment period, but every year the TPA agencies, well, Ecology on behalf of the TPA agencies, on behalf of all three of us, so Ecology, EPA, and the U.S. Department of Energy, conduct a survey kind of gauging, the public's perception of public involvement for the prior calendar year. So we're looking to issue the survey for 2024 and early 2025, and we usually send it out in early January. So we just wanted to list that as a heads up that that's not a public comment period, but it's kind of a public involvement kind of activity that we'll be seeking feedback from the public on beginning early next year.
And I think you said that typically is around 30 days.
Yeah, typically around 30 or so days. We'll extend it if we want to, kind of one, depending on circumstances.
Clarify Newcon.
Newcon is a vapor control technology that is used for one of the, I believe, single shelf tanks. And that's probably all I can speak to at my level about Newcon. But if you have additional questions, Eddie's on and can take detailed questions. Other opportunities for public involvement, as I mentioned, not specifically related to Hanford, but one of the permits, dangerous waste permits that we issue is for Permafix Northwest. They are a commercial treatment facility in the city of Richland. They do take majority of Hanford waste and treat it there. We have a dangerous waste permit with them that is a renewal that will be going out for public comment in January. Probably, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to commit Eddie. Early 2025, but we anticipate probably around the end of January. And then we also have the air operating permits that will be going out for public comment next year. That's a renewal of that permit. And as Ryan said, the Hanford site-wide dangerous waste permit. I know everyone's anxiously awaiting review of 20,000 pages of that permit that will be going out for public comment in 2025. And I'll speak about status of that a little later. If there are any questions on that slide, I'm happy to pause.
I just want to, just to clarify, that is Ecology comment period. So that's just make it clear that DUV wants to separate, the same for EPA.
I had a question, Nick Paul was handed off to you earlier in the morning session, but Ms. Burke had something about rust on the tank or something. Didn't address that.
Yes, so I have that. I have Suzanne on and I sent her a chat and she was going to do some follow-up. She hadn't heard about any rust and TBI totes. But Suzanne, anything that you would add on the question of whether we had heard or had concerns about rust in the TBI totes?
So Dan made some quick phone calls this morning and has some answers, so I'll let him answer it.
Good morning, everyone. The totes were what were called government furnished equipment and came in and were a little refurbished and had some discoloration. They were resealed. They were completely brought to 100%, put out in the field, and there have been inspections on those. They meet DOT certification. They meet all the inspection requirements, and there is no rust on any of them.
Thank you, Dan. I'll go back and start you.
Just as a follow-up, there's a non-conforming items during installation, and our understanding was that the totes had to be completely replaced. Because of, they were observed to have uniform rust speckles where the internal coating had failed. And this was all on the administrative record. But maybe.
I think there might be some conflation here, if my memory serves when I read the report. The tote that failed was the delay tank. And they replaced it with one of the shipping totes, yeah.
One of the process totes was taken from the process tote service and remade into a delay tote.
Yeah. So they took a process tote, actual one, made that into the delay tank to replace that tank that had failed.
Okay.
Or at least that's how I read the report.
Okay.
The materials failure raises a whole bunch of questions.
That is
Okay, yeah, let's stay on track here.
Did we answer your question though? Is there any follow on that that we could take back and provide you an answer on?
Let me,
Okay. You know how to contact us.
Yeah.
We didn't address your question.
thank you.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne and Dan. And Dan is our project manager in Suzanne's section for safe waste treatment. Next slide. I'll briefly just cover this because you heard from Brian Metz this morning on Hanford site funding. You also heard a little bit from EPA on Hanford site funding. It is very important that Hanford gets the funding that they need to complete their cleanup obligations. And you'll hear from Teresa later on the structure of the tri-party agreement, but essentially the state of Washington and EPA have enforceable milestones in the structure of the tri-party agreement that says when Department of Energy needs to meet all of their environmental regulatory obligations to our regulatory agencies. And so they need to be requesting the funding that is needed to meet all of those regulatory obligations. Now, it does cause us to be in tri-party agreement negotiations when Department of Energy doesn't receive the amount appropriated by Congress that they need to meet all of their obligations. But Washington State feels it's very important for us to take a proactive role in the conversations that we can have with our Washington congressional delegation around the importance of the Hanford cleanup, the progress that's being made, and the funding that is needed for Department of Energy to meet their regulatory obligations. So when we go back and have conversations with our congressional delegation, that's sort of the flavor of the conversation that we have. We have publications that we put together around the funding that is needed. The graphics here titled Hanford Budget at a Glance is an example. The publications that we put together are out on our website. We're happy to provide those. As Brian talked about.
Stephanie, what would you like to see from
Going on.
our congressional delegation?
Well, go ahead. I'm not visible.
But you're audible.
Okay. I think that's a great question and a conversation that Max and I have had. And I think the importance of education, the role that the regulatory agencies have at Hanford, the regulatory structure and makeup of the Hanford cleanup is very important for folks to understand the obligation the Department of Energy has to our states to clean up the site on the schedules that they've agreed to in the consent order. All of that continues to be very, very important so that when we have conversations, they know why are we here asking for money and where is the money going? I think that has been very valuable for us and putting together, brief one-pagers of the work that we do and the money that we need. We found to be pretty helpful.
just a level that I'll throw Max later, but if you point on the compression outbeat in Oregon. The big thing that jumped up to me, you're talking about regulatory deadlines, but I think Brian mentioned just deadlines in general. But that's where I'm kind of thinking, and then you got here, Congress passed a continuing resolution for December. I mean, Congress is gonna be like, we gave you money or what's going on, right? So in goals of ecology, what's, like you said, what's the main thing you want to communicate to Congress, especially with all these regulatory deadlines that they're all pushing?
So one, I'll also mention that Ryan and I were back in DC. This was my first time there in person meeting with our congressional delegation. And the thing that the message we continue to say is, as you can see, we are receiving record funds appropriated to Hanford. That increase is great to see. It's great to see that, you know, we have folks like Senator Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, that are very involved and interested in the Hanford cleanup, and they really fight for the Hanford cleanup for us to get the amount that we need. So we're grateful for any amount that we receive and that we're appropriated, but we continue to say that that's not enough. We have, using the structure of part of the discussion also, and I think Mia, you asked the question, was around the life cycle. I always get like the title wrong, but it's like the life cycle cost scope and schedule report. We use that. We no longer get the information from the Department of Energy about the detailed budget request that they put forward to the Office of Management and Budget. So under the structure of the life cycle cost scope and schedule report, we extrapolate out to come up with the compliant budget number that is needed by Department of Energy to meet the tri-party agreement milestones. So when we go back and talk to our congressional delegation, and that's what you see here, like that red, very tiny on the screen, I apologize for that. That's the compliant budget number trend. And as Brian noted, with the ramp up of the tank waste treatment mission next year, more money is needed, and we'll continue to see an escalation of the cost that's needed for Department of Energy to meet the tri-party agreement obligations, as well as their obligations to us under the consent decree. And that was one of the documents that was out as part of the holistic agreement recently.
Didn't Brian indicate that he was gonna need $6 billion to meet those regulatory schedules?
Yeah, you would have to ask him where those numbers came from. The number that we came up with most recently, if I can read this tiny handwriting, is 4.56 billion in FY25 and then 4.85. But again, these are numbers that Department of Ecology came up with under the framework of the life cycle cost scope and schedule report, and projections in there.
Yeah, it's not even right. So DOE is not sharing their budget request information with you, broken out in that level of detail?
I think that's accurate. And if Eddie needs to correct me, he can. Yes,
Do we know why, and is it foilable?
because that information is embargoed.
Let's let Gary respond.
That is based on Office of Management and Budget directives.
Really?
So we can only release what has been signed by the president. We can't release anything.
That's like
Right.
preliminary work product or something that is.
Yes.
It's not a new issue. I think we've been having the conversation for a few years now, and it's been a concern with both us and.
Yeah.
And the guideline that the executive, the agencies such as, is governed by.
It's not.
So the Hanford Advisory Board used to have a budgets and contracts committee that was essentially disbanded because the numbers were no longer available.
Since about 2017 is when that dried up.
Side note is not the same in Oregon State. The budgets that are requested by our agencies, it's a public record that goes to the governor's office and that is released to governor's budget. So it's a bit of a different process, but Gary has it accurate. And that's just how the best.
Stephanie, please proceed.
Yeah. No, those are really good questions. I don't know if there's anything else on this side. I think we can jump to the next slide, which is the Hanford sideway renewal status. Cass talked about how the tri-party agreement under a Superfund kind of outlays which of us is the lead regulatory agency under Superfund. Well, in addition, Washington State has been delegated the authority to implement regulations, including Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So we have Washington Administrative Code 173-303, which is our dangerous waste regulations. And under that, Department of Energy has many units that treat, store, or dispose of dangerous waste that require a permit coverage. That is essentially why we have the Hanford site-wide dangerous waste permit. It is probably the largest and most complex in the nation. We've been working on the permit renewal since it last went out for public comment in 2012. We received over 4,000 comments on that. And we've been working to respond to comments and address deficiencies in that permit and get it back out for public comment and finally issued. So a little bit of status. There's a 120-day public comment period that we're planning to schedule in early 2025. When we get closer to finalizing the permit, we're going to provide you early notification of the tentative public comment period dates in anticipation that we know the permit is going to be very large and we know everyone needs to sort of plan and allocate the appropriate resources so we can get meaningful public input. The renewal will include 53 operating, closing, and post-closure unit groups. It has 2 corrective action unit groups. It will also, in the front, have standard conditions, attachments, and supporting documents for review. As I mentioned, it'll be about 20,000 pages, and to date, we're complete with 30 unit groups. We're working very hard, and as I said, we are very, very close to getting that done and wrapped up. Eddie on my team leads that as the deputy, and we look forward to being back here soon, talking to you all about the public comment. Next slide, unless there are any questions on the dangerous waste permit update. Okay, T101. So again, Brian spoke a little bit about T101 in August. Department of Energy let us know that they had another single shell tank that was assumed to be actively leaking. I'm not going to remember dates because time flies, but I think it was a couple of years ago when Department of Energy announced they had other actively leaking tanks. Those numbers were B109 and T111. If that jogs the memory, we entered into the process of talking to the Department of Energy about corrective actions that were needed to address leaking tanks on the Hanford site. And that discussion resulted in an agreed order under Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And that agreed order laid out actions Department of Energy needs to take to respond in the interim, as well as final actions to retrieve those actively leaking tanks. So we've been working through the corrective actions for those 2 tanks, and then Department of Energy let us know in August that now we have T101 as well. So the conversations that we've been having with the Department of Energy since August have been revising that agreed order and what actions need to be taken specific to T101. So anticipate that we're working with the Department of Energy and hope it won't be too soon before we're announcing an agreement to amend that agreed order. I think that's status on T101, unless there's any questions for me. Okay. Next slide. So environmental performance demonstration tests for the low activity waste facility. One, I'll highlight that August 6th at Hanford Advisory Board Tank Waste Committee, there was a joint ecology Department of Energy presentation, and there's a recording of that and a copy of the slideshow. They're both hyperlinked in here. If we don't go into enough detail, that's another resource for you to take a look at. But since the vitrification facility is a thermal treatment unit with stack emissions, regulations require that those emissions be tested. Testing results will then be compared to estimates in the predicted mass balance and fed into an established risk assessment. In addition, there are certain chemical emission limits that are in the permit and destruction of organics requirements that need to be demonstrated through testing. If tests are successful, it will show under established operational conditions that the low activity waste facility can be run in a manner that meets permit limits, the boundaries of the risk assessment that protects biota, people, and the environment. The test is required in our regulations and is specified and detailed in our permit. And I know we didn't include a link here, but we can provide a copy of our permit. The permit is still quite big if you're looking for the area of which the requirements are for the environmental performance demonstration test. It's within the waste treatment plant permit operating portion. It is one of the environmental performance demonstration test is one of the most important portions of the permit, and it's how we ensure that the air column is going to be protective of the environment. Ecology, with the help of EPA's RCRA side, wrote the details into the permit. We reviewed and approved the initial risk assessment and are currently working in detail with Department of Energy and the contractors to get ready for the test now that they're going to be, again, operating in 2025. We'll We will be present on the days of the test ourselves. We will have staff in the field overseeing the test activities. We'll review the test data and the results. The facility will be restricted to operate to operational parameters that were provided during the test. And I'll also want to note that the test is not one single test, it's a series of tests, and all of those tests, again, are detailed in our permit. And we anticipate the testing happening in February of 2025. But we continue to meet with Department of Energy routinely as schedules change to make sure that we have the training and staff to be supporting that effort.
So your air monitoring, you're going to be doing stack tests. Are you doing anything downwind, any other air monitoring, other than just testing NOx and whatnot at the stack?
Suzanne, do you want to respond to that?
So it'd just be the stack testing, and there's testing at various different places throughout the off-gas systems and the stack. And there's different trains for different chemicals at those various locations.
Yeah. Matt.
You mentioned that the operations will be restricted to the permit conditions, correct? Are they going to test to a 30 megaton load for your emission stack? The nameplate on the last system? Or is it only going to be the 40%?
Suzanne, do you know that?
Yeah, and I'll have Dan jump in if he needs to. They're going to endeavor to test the facility at the maximum productivity that they could run the facility at. And even though maybe in the future it gets run at a lower rate, because that maximum would be the give the biggest output through the emissions. And in order to then be approved in the future to run at that maximum, they have to test at that maximum.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Any other questions?
Well, I'm just wondering, this is a test using simulated feed. And when it goes live with actual waste, there's going to be some variability in that waste stream. So how do you deal with that in this preliminary testing? Are you looking at kind of worst case scenarios for the waste stream?
Dan?
Yeah, Dan, jump in here, but I believe it's looking at it from a worst case scenario, because it's very hard to do the stack testing after you have hot waste going through the facility, although there is a requirement for a relook at the testing in 5-year increments. And Dan, do you want to offer anything else?
No, you pretty much got it. The test is designed to examine worst case scenarios over time.
All right. No other questions?
No, just an observation that there is no single worst case scenario for a multi-component system. A large amount of organics may be present and influence the results one way, and the next batch doesn't have those organics and the results go another way. I just have seen this happen in my own experiments with treating things, so that's it, just a comment.
Thank you, Suzanne, for helping answer those questions, and Dan, appreciate it. So next slide, again, Brian kind of gave an update on this earlier, and I spoke about it a little earlier too. Public comment on the holistic agreement closed September 1. Holistic agreement included a signed settlement agreement between the Department of Energy, EPA, and Department of Ecology. It included proposed changes to the tri-party agreement, as well as proposed changes to the consent decree. We are reviewing those comments now as tri-parties to respond to them as part of a response to comments document. We received comments from the state of Oregon. Thank you very much for your comments, as well as comments from the city of Bend. We also received comments from the 3 tribal nations, Confederate Tribes of Umatilla, Nez Perce, the Yakima Nation. We also offered consultation with the tribes and did consultation with the Yakima Nation and most recently with the Nez Perce. So we're reviewing all of the comments now and hope to have response to comments and agreements finalized by the end of this calendar year.
So is there a plan for consultation with the CTUIR?
They did not request consultation from us. They did provide us comments though, that we're responding to.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks, Ryan, for providing the link. So all of those comments that everybody submitted are on Ecology's website, so.
Yeah. Yeah, if you just use it's the same during a public comment period, during any comment period, it's ecology-wide, not just nuclear waste program hosts. If you go to any open comment period on our e-comment system, you can see the comments that have been submitted so far. And then if you use that same link after the comment period closes, you can still see the submitted comments. Obviously, there's been no response to them until we issue that, but you can at least see the comments that were submitted.
Questions?
Are you finished? I don't want to jump in.
Yeah, I think I highlighted what I was going to on this slide. Yeah.
I need to revisit, the link between the state and Energy Northwest. Energy Northwest, I'm reading from AI, is a public power joint operating agency of the state of Washington. So you are involved with the Amazon deal to build nuclear reactors at the Hanford site. The feds lease the land. I mean, it's all very connected. So I'm just trying to understand this when I think about it. I know it's further down the road. We don't have to worry about it now, but I am very worried about it. And I know others are as well. And I just wonder, what is Washington State's take on this new development or, you know, Amazon dream of taking over the world?
Yeah.
So, so I will clarify our role. We're Washington State Department of Ecology. So the agency that will likely oversee and that oversees the Columbia Generating Station now is a different Washington State agency. That is the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council. So they would, yes, but that's a different state agency with different points of contact. That would likely, if there's some sort of permitting need, I believe they would be the responsible permitting entity. If they don't have the expertise, what we've seen is they can reach out into other state agencies to ask for expertise. So like at Columbia Generating Station, we work with Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council to go do inspections of their waste storage or hazardous waste storage. But that's probably as much that I can speak to. We have not had any active dialogue with Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council or Columbia Generating Station, Department of Energy on that project.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. And if, you know, you need additional contacts, we can try and provide those. No other questions. We can go to the next slide. And I can take a breather and hand this over to Teresa Howell, who is our Compliance and Regulatory Assistance Section Manager. And she is also our lead for tri-party agreement negotiations and implementation of the tri-party agreement through our program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, and happy to be here today. I'm glad to be able to provide an overview of the TPA for all of you, especially some of the newer folks who maybe are hearing this material for the first time. So I understand that some of the milestones outside of the holistic agreement are of particular interest for Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. So I'm hoping to talk about some of those, and in particular, the M15, M16, and M85 milestones. So M15 covers all of the remedial investigation and feasibility study process for the non-tank farm, non-canyon operable units, of which there are many across the Hanford site, including on the Central Plateau and the 300 area and the river corridor. That major milestone, and I'll talk in a few minutes about what a major milestone means, but that major milestone to complete all of that work is currently due in 2026. M16, that major milestone, covers the remedial actions for non-tank farm, non-canyon operable units. So that's essentially implementing that remedial action work. The M16 milestones cover both soil and groundwater, and that major is due in 2042. You know, staggered a bit in time after the RIFS process would occur, so the implementation could take place. And then M85 covers all of the response actions for the Canyon facilities and the associated operable units, except for U plant and T plant. And that due date in the TPA right now is a to be determined. So we have not yet established a due date for that major milestone to be completed. Many of you heard me give an update on this previously. The tri-parties have been working together since the start of 2024 to update these milestones. Many of them are currently held in abeyance while we continue discussions on how we want to handle some of the interim milestones here that have been due and are coming due in the near future.
Hey, Teresa, one quick question, if you could clarify, because I think Brian mentioned this morning, but just want to outline what in abeyance means for those that might not be familiar.
Sure. So in abeyance is a term that is not defined in the TPA, but it essentially means that we all agree to not enforce on that milestone for the term that we are discussing it. So we're kind of holding it out there in agreement that we are working on a path forward.
Thanks.
So if you want to pop to the next slide. Thank you. So some background on the TPA. So the tri-party agreement is our federal facility agreement and consent order, and it tells us how we'll comply with both CERCLA and RCRA. CERCLA is a Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and RCRA is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Apologies if you all know that, and that's just side information. So the TPA is a kind of the full meal deal, so to speak. So it has everything that we are supposed to accomplish across the site for environmental compliance. And my predecessor always referred to it as the get along agreement, which I think was a good way of describing it. It doesn't confer any additional authority to any of the parties, but it maps out how we'll work together to get the work done. So it consists of the legal agreement, which I will walk through just briefly. There's an introduction that describes the purpose. There's permitting and closure process. There's remedial and corrective action process. And then there's a discussion of how EPA and ecology responsibilities interface with each other. And then there is a common provisions that outlines the dispute resolution process. And then there's an attachment, which is a letter from the Department of Justice. They reviewed certain portions at the request of ecology's governor. And then, I'm sorry, Washington's governor. And then there is the action plan, which is attachment 2, and that it contains a number of chapters and appendices, which I will go through. It's kind of the meat of the agreement. And then it has the plans, procedures, and implementing schedules, the milestones that we speak of. And that's really the part that Stephanie was referencing earlier, where we get our compliance schedule and determine compliant budget. And then it talks about how TPA changes will occur. And next slide, please. So how is the action plan laid out? The introduction has purpose and authorities. Part 2 is the milestones. So these are not milestones themselves, but an explanation of the categories of milestones. So there are tank waste, past practice, and RCRA operating milestones. And then part 3 has unit identification, classification, and prioritization, and that explains the types of units. Part 4 is agreement management, which is how we interface and how decisions are made. Part 5 is the interface of regulatory authorities. That's somewhat self-explanatory. I do recommend reading that as you're able to. It's a very it's interesting from a regulatory perspective how we have set things up at Hanford. Part 6 is the TSD unit. So that's permitting and closure for all of the treatment, storage, and disposal units. Part 7 is the past practice process, which talks about CERCLA process, RCRA corrective action, and then also natural resource damages assessment under Section 107 of CERCLA. I think there was a little bit of earlier discussion about NRD as well. And then Part 8 is the facility disposition process, and that includes the key facilities, the canyons. And Part 9 is documentation and records, who approves what and where it goes. Part 10 is community relations and public involvement. So that includes the public information repositories, public meetings and notices, public participation grants, and also change management. Part 11 is the work schedule, work plans, and associated reports, and that describes the plans and schedules, but the milestones themselves are in Appendix D. Part 12 is changes to the agreement and how those changes will occur. Part 13 is liquid effluent treatment and disposal, and that has the liquid effluent state discharge permits. And that section resulted in part from a liquid effluent study in the early 1990s. And then there is the signature. Next slide, please. So the TPA appendices are also a key part to look at. So there is a extensive list of terms and acronyms in Part A, or in Appendix A, which helps clarify a lot of the acronyms that we use frequently at Hanford. Appendix B is a listing of all of the treatment, storage, and disposal groups and units, and any applicable past practice units that they interface with. In some cases, there is overlap. Appendix C is a prioritized listing of the operable units. So that's the circle operable units, as well as all of the individual waste site listings inside those operable units. And then highlighted there or underlined there is Appendix D, and that's where the TPA milestones are housed. And I'll talk a little bit more about the ones of interest in a moment. Appendix E is key individuals. So that's the contact information for the tri-parties, both the executive manager offices as well as the community relations contact. Part F is supporting technical plans and procedures. Right now, the supporting technical plans and procedures that are contained in Appendix F are the Central Plateau Inner Area Principles and Parameters, the WIDS maintenance procedure, that's the waste site list, investigation derived waste procedure, and the database access procedures. Appendix G is the standards for data management. That lists all of the standards that we go through for how to manage data. Appendix H is the single shell tank waste retrieval criteria procedure. And Appendix I is the SST system waste retrieval and closure process. And those two interface with each other quite extensively. H explains how tank retrieval will occur, and I explains the SST closure process, but they really play together. And then Appendix J is the Central Plateau facilities. So that describes each associated decision document. And it also contains the 400 area facilities and the 100 area reactors. Next slide, please. Oh, sure.
It's Matt Hendrickson with Odell.
Hey, Matt.
I have a quick question. We heard from Brian earlier about prioritizing the more risk intense areas and getting them out of the way. I also see here that you prioritize operable units. Can you briefly describe how that prioritization is done?
And also, can you complete your presentation in the next 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. So yes, I will speed it up a little bit. And so prioritized listing of operable units is probably a bit of a misnomer for Appendix C. Appendix C is really the list. It is not prioritized. So it contains everything that is in there. I would say that the priorities exist in Appendix D as they're reflected in our schedules. Okay. So TPA milestones in Appendix D. A major milestone, as I was speaking to earlier, M1500, M1600, M8500, anything that ends in 00 is the enforceable milestone that is longer term. So that is the completion of all of that scope of work. And there are typically interim milestones that exist below that. So the interim milestones are with the same M dash whichever series listing and then a number. The number at the end, we often are coming up with new milestones under each major. It's pretty infrequent that we change a major milestone, but we are changing and coming up with new or completing interim milestones very routinely. Those are kind of the more intermediate term work. And then target dates are not enforceable milestones. There are not a lot of them in the TPA, but they are kind of a way of keeping on track with some of those interim milestones, but we do not enforce on those. Next slide, please. So the remaining major milestones are all listed on this slide. I think the ones of most interest here are the ones that I touched on earlier, and those are M1500, M1600, and M8500. We are currently working on, path forward for how we're addressing the interim milestones under those majors, but at the forefront of our minds is the idea that M15 is due in 2026. And so, we have been working for the last probably 10 months on how exactly to deal with the bulk of work that remains for some of this CERCLA investigation.
Okay, so board members are getting restless. Our food is here, so maybe we can take a couple questions and wind this up. Anyone? Yeah.
Hi, Teresa, this is Mia. I have a few questions about your M15, M16, M85 milestone discussions. I'm curious how affected those discussions are by the holistic agreement. And what I mean by that is budget. So if all of these activities that are tied to the holistic agreement need to happen soon, and the budget is going towards those activities, how are the milestones in abeyance being pushed out by that, if at all?
Yeah, so the budget piece itself is probably a question that DOE could answer better than I could. But my understanding is that funding for this work is not decreasing based on what we reached for the holistic agreement. So that is kind of what we are working to is still that understanding that some of this work will move forward, but there's a great deal of it that has to move forward.
That's great to hear. Another quick question: when do you expect to have like a milestone change package? Is that what would come out with the change dates?
Yes. So I can't really give you a very satisfactory answer on that. I do not know exactly what will be public facing anytime soon. However, we are actively working on it. We've been at it for quite some time. So
thank you.
Jim.
Yeah, just a question. Ecology is going to get a new governor and a new federal administration, your cabinet position. Do we expect, how ironclad is all this stuff that there's not going to be some sort of upheaval?
So I think that's probably a question for me, unless Teresa wants to take it.
No.
Thank you.
So I can say that, yes, there will be a new governor, and we are, I think every agency, including I know Department of Energy did this, is preparing an administration change strategy document for how to brief a new incoming administration, not just the governor, but new governor policy advisors that we will work with. When it comes to things that are ironclad, we have inked agreements right now. Anything that is in the inked agreement, like the tri-party agreement, like the consent decree, we don't anticipate being changed. But when there are large scale things that happen that Department of Ecology has authority over, we do brief the governor's office. So things that are changed subsequently with a new governor could be impacted.
Jim, I wondered the same thing, by the way. We thought about that as well. It's a good question.
Definitely in the forefront of my mind too.
Yeah. But my question, Stephanie, was, do you have anything more to share today that's ready to be shared publicly about what we can expect next on communication related to the holistic agreement on transportation planning or an EVA review process, or maybe what to expect as a community related to that process? Anything else to share? We just talked about already.
I don't think I have more information to share at this point in time until we have, like I said, until we have the conversations we need to have with EPA and Department of Energy and responding to those comments, including the comments that we received about there needing to be additional public engagement on the environmental analysis. DOE needs to make their decision on where they're going to grout. I don't have much more I can share about that. But one thing, just really quickly, that I want to highlight, and being transparent, Teresa talked about appendices H and I regarding single shell tank retrieval and closure. In the settlement agreement for holistic, it was called out in there that the tri-party agencies would go into another mediation session to discuss trying to revise those appendices to see if we could come to an agreement. So those are active discussions that we're in right now with EPA, with Dave and DOE.
Okay, we are going to have a working lunch today, so let's take 5 minutes for a bio break and people can start filling up their plates, and then in 5 or 7 minutes, we'll kind of trip to, Bremerton.
Max has to drive.
You paused that to ask that question just at the right time when you did the pipe.
This is right there.
Here comes Max. It's not Max. Absolutely. There he is. There's the men of the hour.
So you wanna, a highlight on the Bremerton?
Yeah, just very high level, because everyone had a chance to look at the trip report, so, thank you.
Oh.
What was your
Ben and I went to Bremerton, Washington, which is just south of Seattle.
I don't have.
And did a tour of the naval shipyards there, where they were decommissioning a submarine. The if a submarine is a sausage, the Navy took a slice through the middle of it, through the entire submarine, where the radioactive bits are, put end caps on them, and then welded it to a barge. And that barge is now gonna make its way up, or it has made its way up the Columbia River, and will have its final resting place in Hanford, where about 130 of these nuclear submarine engines are already resting. So we were able to tour the barge. It was pretty impressive. It was an enormous chunk of metal welded to this barge. Because it's really just a cross section of the entire sub. And
unmute for people online, part of this conversation.
We're not muted.
Okay.
so we were very impressed with the Navy, how much information they shared, how many people, really high up people they allowed or they invited to come along with us and answer our questions. I think our small group, it was just 3 of us, but it was supposed to be larger. There were supposed to be other Washington folks who were there for an inspection. And so Mark Henry was supposed to be there and he had to cancel the last minute. So we literally had 19 Navy officers following us around answering questions, which was very impressive. You put it-
I was gonna say, like, and they weren't all, like, is it very high up? It was like the director of this unit or
Right.
senior, supervisor of that unit, and they all. I was just amazed that people taking that much time out of the data.
Yeah.
Also, they encouraged us to ask all of the questions and we did. We stood outside by a barge and had peppered them with questions for a very long time and they were very patient and answered them. I don't think we stumped them. You had a question that they were going to look up, but that was one question out of the entire one that they didn't have an actual, something you would have been able to answer after spots. So something very detailed about like insurance policies for the barge or something.
But a good trip, and we hope to be able to do that maybe on an annual basis.
Their decommissions occur twice a year.
Twice a year.
In October and in April, depending on the river levels, and yes, it's like when we get into the WIP tool, we'll be happy to include other members of the Oregon Hanford cleanup door when we get this invitation, go up there to observe the pre-inspection of work.
And the timing's about right. That barge might be on the river now, so.
Thank you for the. Yeah.
I've received confirmation the barge has made it to Hanford. They let me know since.
Good.
Okay, Jim did sure. Thank you. Fine. Contact working lunch for tax purposes. True. We have a slideshow. And we might kind of end up mixing and mingling the ODO update with the board business, which is coming up for the afternoon session, trying to keep it at least somewhat distinct. Matt, is a little slideshow that I put together. Thanks, Matt, for helping me get this pulled together. So we talked about the Bremerton naval facility. People may remember that 2 years ago, yeah, it was 2 years ago, Tom Cecilia and I did the same inspection and had a cool photo of Tom and I standing in front of the sub, actually it's everybody on the crew, standing on the barge itself, being dwarfed by the sub compartment. I don't think you got a photo this year.
They were very, very clear about nothing photos, nothing
Yeah.
USB ports. Thing.
Well, I wasn't allowed to bring my own, but they had an official battalion.
Oh, they had a guy.
Picture of Tom and I in this bigger group 2 years ago, so maybe even that is too much to share. This year, things change.
But your submarine was a celebrity.
Yeah. It was the,
It was on Hanford too.
no, our submarine was on an episode of NCIS.
Well,
Yeah, I got one for
you can hear.
Go big game.
We did not have a celebrity.
Well, final submarine note about that. We have a colleague from the Oregon Health Authority. Oregon Health Authority has a division called Radiation Protection Services, or RPS, if you call them. We work with them very closely on issues in Oregon, radiation safety and disposal. One of their staff members who did the tour the week before our team went had served as a Navy submariner on that ship that he was then inspecting on its final decommissioning.
The Corpus Christi.
Yeah, which I thought was a really incredible, like, coincidence, but, you know, sort of lifespan of his professional career. That submarine's final resting place, I guess, as it were, sort of ingloriously disposed of at a scrapyard, or at the Hanford site. Anyway, okay. Well, also, I think that was sort of a really cool tour, number one of the fall. Cool tour 2 of the fall, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, was down to New Mexico to the facility called the Waste Isolation Pilot Project Plant. Or WIP. Maddie's gonna give you that, yeah, cool. Okay, we'll wait for Maddie to do that. So we've got a slideshow here. I've creatively titled it Recent Updates. That's kind of what we're getting to here. I got a few things to talk about, and I'm gonna ask Matt and maybe Tom to talk a little bit about a few slides here as well. So let's go forward. And some of this, that's small type, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Next time we'll bring a bigger projector. Bigger screen. So it's like a lot of this material, you'll recognize, we actually talked about already today. That's okay. We're sort of reiterating key points, but you can kind of talk about it a little further if you want to. I also wanted to have these slides prepared, share with the board afterward, so that you'll have links to a lot of the articles and sort of publications just in one place. So that's sort of the dual purpose of this, is these are all hot links that we'll spend this after the meeting, so you can then click around. In the fall, as probably people have been tracking, there have been some emails. Jeff sent a good email, Esteban, you shared some emails, and Stephanie, you described earlier. From the end of the holistic negotiation comment period, September 1st, through September and October, there was quite a few Hanford media articles. And I just wanted to share these here and talk about sort of the basics of them all. The Street Routes, the Oregon Capital Chronicle, and the Spokesman Review, those are all primarily focused on, as the titles show you, the transportation of waste, potentially through our state. So I think the governor's letter, the Governor Kotek's letter, got the attention of the media, as rightfully should. It's a big deal. Yep. And so multiple media outlets, both in our state and then kind of following on in the state of Washington, talked about sort of what's at least under consideration right now. Like, plan seems like a strong word, but it's under consideration. The concept for a plan, so on. So, sorry, I couldn't. The Spokane paper was interesting. For this article, I was interviewed. I'll say that I was interviewed for that number 4 on there, and I talked for quite a while to the reporter. And both Brian Vance earlier and Stephanie Ryan mentioned there's a lot of confusion in the public now between the test bed initiative shipment of waste, which is 2,000 gallons liquid waste, and it is going through community, Spokane, City County. On its way to final disposal in Texas and Utah. Well, that's the plan. It will happen in the spring. Confusion between that process and the potential for shipping of tank waste on a much larger scale. And I'll just be the third person to say this. There's a lot of distinction there, but let's keep those two things separate in our minds. They are separate projects. Interesting thing, the Capital Chronicle paper, and the reporter did not call us, so we didn't get contacted about that story. Which is too bad. We could help clarify a few things. The article, if folks read it, is, you can say this, expresses concern with the shipping of a few thousand gallons of waste through Oregon. And I guess I should tell the reporter that's actually a few million gallons that might be considered. So if you're concerned about a few thousand gallons, you'll really be concerned about a few million gallons. So there's some education, long way to say there's some education to do between now and any shipping campaign, and Stephanie and I have been talking about this quite a bit. And we, as the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board, Department of Energy, and Oregon State Government, I'll just say again, stand ready to help third-party agencies, DOE, ecology, EPA, with communication to our communities and eventually safety training and other sort of process steps that are involved. If shipments, the major shipments of tank waste should go through Oregon, we're ready to help with those discussions, make sure it's solid waste before leaving the Hanford site. That's our position. The OPP Think Out Loud, link number 3 here. The whole week, if anybody listens to Dave Miller, the Think Out Loud radio journalist, and King, who does both OPB and Northwest Public Broadcasting, went to Richland and spent the whole week doing a series of articles, radio articles, like radio stories, about Hanford. It wasn't necessarily about the holistics or transportation, but of course that's not a part of the conversation. Tom was initially contacted months ago when they were planning the series, and then it didn't come together. I don't, this unfortunately didn't.
But me, I got to go.
You got to go. That's right. So I wasn't.
Well, it was strange. I wasn't supposed to go. It was supposed to be our staff attorney. And then, yeah, I came back early because of the hurricane, came back early from Tennessee and found out that I was going to be doing the interview next day. I was able to do it from Portland instead of having to drive all the way to Richland to do it in person. So I was just all alone in this recording studio, and Dave Miller was in Richland. It was very strange.
Yeah.
And live interviews are really scary, but it went okay, I think.
Cool. Well done. That's right. I understood that ecology was also contacted, but again, didn't actually get to participate in the end with the articles.
Actually, one thing that might be of interest, once DOE announces the transportation route for holistics, we floated with the potential idea of having this board have meetings along that route instead of along the river, to be sort of a good venue for outreach.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, I'll for Gary and Ryan, when you're planning meetings in our state, let us help you. We can take this board on the road. We can go to Umatilla County, Baker County, Malheur County. That's one of the routes selected. If it's Central Oregon, you know, we can go through Central Oregon corridors. And then we'd be glad to do that. So let us help you with that. Glad to do so. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is really, I thought I would mention the called keeping an eye on holistic negotiations. That's a great flow diagram on tank waste planning treatment. I think it's kind of a cool graph. It's great. What's going on? It's kind of.
You told me you were gonna make one, and we did.
This one is, you really got to look at it. It's almost like you could blow up to a poster and put it on the wall or something. It's really, it's kind of pretty graphic.
It's a fractal too, so as you zoom in, it gets more complex.
Oh.
We're worried about just this little section. Here's our SY right there.
So even though we've talked today, a few touch points about the holistic negotiations, this board hasn't been together since the comment letter was submitted, and I thought I'd just reiterate a few of the points and the things that we're tracking. You know, after any questions that now after ecology, Teresa's presentation, you understand the sort of numbering system for the milestones, M62, 64. That's sort of the relation between shipping of tank waste or treatment of tank waste related to the test bed initiative. And as Brian Vance mentioned, test bed initiative, taking that 2,000 gallons will be shipped in the springtime. It seems to us that using the information that they would gather from the test bed initiative about, engineering, safety, disposal, law, seems wise to use that information in making a decision on how to treat billions of gallons. So that, that's an important point to keep in mind there. And also remember that the initial draft of the holistics had a decision being made at the end of this calendar year, which would be prior to the test bed initiative actually occurring. So it felt a little out of sequence for me, and for I think all of us. Second point number two, solid or liquid waste for transportation. Oregon's position is strongly on solid waste, solidified at the Hanford site. Said that for a while. The governor herself very formally says that too. NEPA, transportation analysis, and NEPA equivalents. We're still waiting to see the DOE's assessment of what type of NEPA analysis has to be done. I think that's the right way to phrase it. They called it a supplemental analysis of what analysis had to be done in other words, but it basically means they're trying to figure out exactly what level of detail due to be NEPA compliant, as well as hopefully share information with the public about the whole project, but for us, transportation is key. And then the last point, community engagement process. And again, just reiterate that this board is ready to help out with community engagement in our state. Okay. More to come on the holistics. No doubt. We got the logo. Yeah. So I thought I would share a few points about what our team has done recently with some public engagement. For folks who are, kind of interested, part of our charge is to inform the Oregon public about Hanford and what's happening, and to be out and engage with communities. And so here's a couple of ways we've done that recently. Sarah presented to, it's called Science on Tap. What lies beneath? It's kind of cool title. And if I can put it on the slide, Sarah, it's the feedback is great, really well received. The organizers provided, some written feedback that this sounded really fabulous. So well done, great job. That was like 2 weeks ago. Sarah's been traveling a lot for us lately. Did the Bremerton sub tour, and then I think the very next day you had the Science on Tap speaking engagement. So
Jeff was too tired to go.
It's a lot.
That's why I didn't go either. So.
Yeah, Sarah had to go. That was great.
That organization is also interested in having a presentation from one of the tribes vis-a-vis Hanford, and we just haven't closed that loop yet.
That's great. On Monday, these last people, we had to split up our team on Monday. Tom and Matt and I spoke at Portland State University. We were invited to speak, and Maddie helped organize that talk. Thank you. And it was a seminar series from the physics department. We're not a physics major, but they seemed to be interested in our topic. And so I thought it was pretty well received. We probably had 30 or so mixture of students who were taking the class for credit, and then it was also open to the public and a handful of members of the public and other interested folks from the university there. Just kind of talk generally about Hanford. Tom gave his Tom and a hand gesturing, his geologic history of the site, which is always really cool. We talked recent history, and then we talked geologic history, and Tom with his geology. Well, you're right there. See, gives a great presentation on the geologic history of the region, really, but the Hanford site as well, and why it matters for today. Good stuff. And we've done that talk to this board before. Maybe we'll do it again sometime again. It's a good talk.
So what were some of the questions or comments that they'll ask you and Mark and?
Well, at PSU, it was a wide range. We had questions from, people even asking about the chemistry and the sort of chemistry details at the site. There was a question about the temperature, the heat in the tanks, and sort of this from this temperature that came up. And then all the way up to sort of high level policy questions on waste disposal. There was, of course, the questions around deep geologic repository and permanent disposal. It felt like an audience that knew something, like they knew more than, I think, perhaps most people about the Hanford site and about nuclear waste policy in our country and that kind of a thing. So it was kind of a range of questions at our spot. What questions can, just as you take a bite? Hey, Mark spoke to Oregon State University on Monday as well.
Yeah, the nuclear engineering program, and kind of given an overview of the radiological emergency preparedness program, which included Hanford. The majority of the follow-up questions at the end of that was what they zeroed in on Hanford. It was, want to know more about the tanks. How long is this go on? It just never ceases to amaze me. You can talk about the nuclear power plant and all the other things, and they'll come back to Hanford. How come the tanks, the quantity is configured in gallons? That was a question that came out from one of the students, and I was like, that's an interesting question. It was just, hey, with you, just it kept going. So these guys will take the next round so they can follow up on that. But
I
it's
did
good.
get a lot of questions about, um, I started my talk saying I'm an ecologist. I work on this, like, after the cleanup, we concentrate on restoration. So that was like a long-winded way of saying, I am not gonna have really solid answers on the cleanup side. But almost all of my questions from that audience were about cleanup.
You had more than 30 people.
I had 130 people.
Yeah.
That's pretty rich. It's quite a few.
And at the very end of my talk, I had a slide that said, you know, empower yourself, educate yourself, and these are the things you can do. You can go to the ecology website, and there's a let's talk about Hanford webinar series. There are podcasts of interviews with Ken Niles on our website, as well as go to the ODO website to apply to be part of this board, and go to the DOE website to apply to be part of the HAB. So like, and there was a lot of interest. There were people nudging each other saying, you know, should apply.
Cool, that's great. Okay, next slide, Matt. The next one here, this is an event, it's not really, this is not a public, actually, not really, it's not a public event, but I thought this board should be aware of what is coming up.
I want to put the Matilda. Oh, I messed up. I wanted to put a cool deck of cards or maybe some dice.
Oh, it's not just
Slot
Stigwig.
machine.
It's not just Stigwig. So the upcoming event, so Stigwig is an acronym for the State and Tribal Government Working Groups, which is a national organization, just as it sounds, states and tribes that are affected by the DOE weapons cleanup complex, Hanford included, but all the other sites across the country. And Sarah represents the Stigwig group. There is a national meeting in Las Vegas coming up in the end of, no, it's the first week of December. I attend as well. I represent a different group. I represent the Oregon Governor's Office to the National Governors Association related to federal facilities and federal facility cleanup of nuclear waste sites. And Tom is coming as well. So we all get together, these groups, there's a couple of these groups, they get together once a year. It happens to be in Nevada this year, and it's sort of just a choice of the organization. Last year we were in Minneapolis. And I love Minnesota. It's a very different environment than Las Vegas. So it just kind of rotates around. The cool part about going to Nevada is that we will get a tour of the, what used to be called the Nevada Test Site, now it's called the Nevada National Security Site.
Do we have tours?
Some of us.
They should do tours.
So, those of us who go will get a tour of the Nevada National Security Site. That's what's called.
So to complicate things, the Governors Association is the Federal Facilities Task Force, which is FFTF, which if you listen to Hanford talks, FFTF is also the Fast Flux Test Facility. So when we're going to the FFTF, we're not going to the FFTF.
Yeah, that's
Probably the best.
Lots of acronyms. We know that FFTF had two, but it's a weird one. Anyway, I just wanted this group to be aware. We can do a report out at our next meeting about how that meeting goes. I've gone to a couple of, this will be my third called the intergov meeting. Intergov meaning federal, state, local, tribal, intergovernmental agencies getting together. It's been a third one. So far as last 2 years, it's been a really great meeting. It gets DOE headquarters, site staff, and then colleagues of ours across the nation together to talk about, what's happening in Los Alamos, New Mexico, what's happening in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, what's happening in West Valley, New York, et cetera. The sites across the nation that have similar issues that we deal with, and just understand what their relationships are between state, local, tribal, federal, issues that might be common, and sort of approaches towards engagement, cleanup, regulation, et cetera. Anyway, so that's coming up, first week of November, week after Thanksgiving, we'll be there. We'll report out next time. It's good. That's it. And I assume ecology will be there. I know ecology will be there. Of course.
Yeah,
You going to Vegas, Stephanie?
I am. This will be like my 6th or 7th one. So there'll be a few of us. I'm going, Edward Holbrook is online with going to the hall as well. So we'll be at the Stigwood Fall meeting, and then and also just pointing out that the National Association of Attorney General is one of the groups. So my Attorney General's office attends routinely, sends folks, as well as Energy Communities Alliance, another community organization that represents local interests.
Ecos is the other group, right?
The Environmental Council of States that has EPA and state agencies that represent cleanup sites.
Yeah, and actually one of our Oregon DOJ attorneys who works with me on the natural resource damage assessment is going to this through NAG, through the National Association of Attorney Generals.
Yes, that's really cool, Matt. That's
But they don't let us attend those meetings without our attorneys.
So this slide and the next slide, I'm gonna ask Matt if you can talk, and this is a little bit of what I had mentioned. This is just for board's awareness, comment periods at Hanford that are coming up, things that we are working on or will be working on as a staff.
So, we are working on the 5-year plan placement, placemat. That comment period closes on the 31st. The forecasts, next 5 years, DOE's activity at Hanford.
It's an actual placement too. Like,
Yeah,
it's like, it's not just a joke. That's really it's designed like a two-sided map graphic. I mean, there's associated like documents with it, but it's a nice, just a visual way to understand what's happening.
11 by 17 page, double-sided.
Yeah.
And, the Legacy True, WHIP comment period closes January 3rd, 2025.
Can you explain what that is and why it matters?
I'll let Tom explain what that is.
Okay.
Yes.
So as part of the WHIP permit, sort of like the Rev 9 of the Hanford permit, they have their own record operating permit. And they just renewed theirs for the next 10 years last year. And part of that it's saying that we're taking true transuranic waste from all over the complex. We're also taking this new down blended plutonium as transuranic waste. And we're gonna designate one panel, one room of WHIP for, to the extent practicable, legacy waste. And they say, we don't really define what legacy waste is in this permit. That's up to DOE to define. So DOE put out their definition of legacy waste. The Hanford Advisory Board weighed in on it. Different groups around the nation have weighed in. And so the DOE Carlsbad office is holding a public comment period on the definition of legacy true waste.
So there was another comment period that I responded to after the lecture about the expansion of WHIP, which is very political, very contentious, and I commented to Governor Hobbs' office. I think these are different times.
I'm not sure.
The one that I responded to was about expanding WHIP, not closing it down as it was to be closed down in 2030, technically.
I don't think, yeah, this is specific to the legacy waste definition. I don't know that they're, yeah, I'm not aware of the other ones.
So, a question that I have for the board as a whole is, should we comment, should this board take a position and comment on either one of these issues?
I'm planning on commenting on the legacy true. And my comment right now is leaning towards, you guys did a good job. This is exactly what we wanted to say.
So would that be a Odo comment or a joint?
We could do a joint. I think that might be a nice statement on that one in particular. It's more of a high level policy issue, and I think that would be well within the board's remit to slide onto that together. I think so. More so than the 5-year, like the 5-year placemat's a little, it's an annual thing that we comment on that doesn't change all that much year to year.
And it's not a comment period, it is a engaged feedback period, so it's not, there probably won't be a response to comment.
I think that waste classification is a good opportunity for the board to engage. Why don't we get a letter together and circulate them?
And that closes, I think, January 25th, so we got a little bit of time.
I think the third is what I said.
So,
January 3rd?
Yeah.
Okay.
so just to close that out, so this board, if there's no objections, will do a joint comment on the legacy true waste issue together with Odo.
I'll try to get a draft around before Thanksgiving.
Everybody will take it. Yes,
Yeah.
and Stephen's gonna talk about that.
So there's also a couple of items for your edification in here. This I took from one of the mini documents about the legacy waste. Just saying that at Hanford, they're considering all waste retrieved, buried, or generated prior to 2000 is considered legacy waste, which I think is why Tom's happy about that. And here, for your own edification as well, if you're interested in the CERCLA talk that Cass gave earlier, this is also RCRA and CERCLA integration at Federal Facilities Online Academy. And the bad thing about it is tomorrow, I know I'm going to be in it, but here's the site for it. If you're interested, send me an email or you can write it down there. So.
Sorry, I'm not totally sure about the legacy waste thing. I want to make sure I understand it. What was the space of possible actions that could have taken? So they decided something before 2000 all counts as legacy waste. But they have decided something different and that would be bad.
They could have made a lot of different decisions. They made a very inclusive decision, which I think everyone advocated for.
Okay.
The date.
Yeah.
Put the date back in time, you cut off waste created after a certain.
So,
Got it.
so there's retrievably stored and suspect or potential true. So retrievably stored was put in place after 1970. They could have said only retrievably stored true is true
Got it.
legacy. They did.
Got it. That's what I thought I understood it to be, but I wanted to make sure I actually.
The waste generated before 2000, what happened?
So the waste that was put in place before 2000, when it's dug up or transported to the waste isolation pilot plant, it will have a place to go. There's concern about WIP filling up. And so they wanted to set aside a room that's just for the complex to set the stuff that has to go there. That isn't downblended weapons. That the change now is that there's surplus plutonium that isn't fit for weapons, or they're not making new weapons. I'm not an expert on that part. But in order to make that able to be disposed, they have to downblend it. So they take a tiny bit of plutonium and mix it with a whole lot of concrete to downblend it. And so it takes up a lot of space and it's going to WIP. So they wanted to make sure in the permit that they immortalize the fact that the production complex has a space to go. And so they set aside a panel as space allows for just that waste.
I think the issue is really that WIP is just space constrained.
Yeah.
And so if you make a definition that says it's more inclusive, you might have waste that is not able to fit. Somebody has a capacity issue at that facility, even if it could go, it's just not space. So I think it's probably that balancing act, as well as the state of New Mexico's own issues or concerns they might have with that facility. So.
We're glad that they made a inclusive definition because that means more of the stuff has a place that we know it's going.
Yeah, right. Okay. Space permitting, they would be legally allowed to go to the site to look New Mexico for the sports.
There's a higher probability that all the Hanford waste can go there.
Yeah, that's good.
Thanks so much. That really clarifies. It's hard because there's like 4 different chains of definition going into figuring out what actually is going to happen. So.
So it was 100, I mean, the 42 mile trench that are online.
Mm.
I've checked through,
Some of them, yeah.
yeah, some of them, and there was an initial, like the category was about 160,000 drums. That's it. That sounds
So
like a reliable number, and with that fit, and with.
I'm gonna. The Carlsbad Field Office has been confident that all of the material can fit. Carlsbad measures true waste not by the drum, but by the stuff in the drum. So in order to transport true, you have to have a little bit of true in a drum with like vermiculite or, some kind of clay material to absorb any liquids. And so Hanford will consider that a drum. But Carlsbad might consider that just the true inside the drum for their inventory.
I thought they are, statutory
Yes,
by law.
only allowed to take a
Volume.
certain amount, only allowed to take a certain volume of transuranic waste. So they've interpreted that, and I'm not speaking for DOE, this is my interpretation of their interpretation. As meaning that the volume of transuranic waste is the stuff in the drum, not the 55 gallons.
Okay, so enough, we're getting down into too much detail. If I had one of those gavels, that's.
Get you a start thing in it.
Okay. Keep going.
All right, here, we'll rock through this. So we got ourselves a whole lot of upcoming comment periods. So you can kind of see here that early 2025 is going to be quite busy. We talked a little bit about rod amendments. We are expecting at least 2 of those next year for 324 and 100K, which has been pushed to next year. Budget. So the budget's going to come out and take a look at that. That's going to be a big HAB issue as well. And then, of course, Rev 9A, which will take up a good 120 days for that comment period, which is, the regular site permit.
And I was guessing, is that close, Ryan?
Say that again. I was looking.
The yellow bar, is that close for your timeline? I was guessing.
Over at 9.
That's about February when I'm guessing. Well, maybe March.
Well, yeah, I think what we got right now as general time frame was early 2025, so sure.
But yeah, that's what we've got coming up, at least comment periods that we know of, and there will be another 5-year, of course, and some of the other things like that, which I did think of.
Take that back and make sure that that's accurate.
Well, maybe I interpreted the placement wrong, because to me, it looked like it got pushed to something like 28.
That's the implementation of the rod, not the
Implementation of the rod.
actual plan.
Okay.
So, yeah. 100K and N are likely gonna be around the same time, but we don't know exactly when. So, yeah, any details you can give on when those are gonna be, that'd be great.
I think you heard from EPA that, the new value for the next crown, so I think that's impacting the decisions that we're already put out for public comment, so we had to push back to the company.
Can you forward that to Ryan? Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan.
You're good. No.
In
Okay.
flux, but it was my understanding that we were gonna take action A and be at the same time, but to not overwhelm folks with everything out for public comment, have one after the other. So I'll take that back and let you know that.
Next, one more content slide here, and this is really just to summarize what's been talked about earlier today. And again, to have a reference for the board after this meeting. The 2 GAO reports, Government Accountability, US Government Accountability Office reports, about Hanford and the overall complex. Again, we talked about this before, not to belabor the point, but the first bullet here is about a report on DOE's engagement with stakeholders and communities, governments and tribes. And that's the question I asked Brian and Jeff asked Brian Vance earlier today. And then the second report is about high-level waste treatment at the site specifically, and Brian Vance again mentioned that. When Brian said they are not stopping construction of a high-level waste facility, it was in reference to this GAO report, which said that DOE should consider stopping construction of the high-level waste treatment facility. I don't know enough to speak to that, to Yes, but I wanted these reports to be here for board and maybe you can take a look at it. Have questions if you have.
So, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I sent out an email on the first GAO report because it had that language in there that DOE was de-emphasizing regional issues in favor of local issues. And I thought that this board should respond to that, in fact, take exception to that. So there's a draft out here that is probably a little too strongly worded from a political standpoint. So I think I would ask our friends at Odo to launder this, get it back to us, so maybe we can then consider sending this out in response to the first GAO report. And then the second one, I don't think anyone's really had a chance to digest that yet, since it just came out in the last 10 days or so, but it also looks like something that we should at least consider responding.
It is significant, and Jeff will definitely take your, letter and view it. That is, on the high level waste, I might call on Stephanie if you wanted to speak about that second GAO report.
Yeah, I was just gonna highlight that, I think Brian spoke to it too in his talk this morning, and it's a lengthy report and I know everyone's time is valuable. So I'll just highlight if you're wondering what the agencies think about it. Ecology did not provide comments on that, but EPA did provide comments as well as Department of Energy, and they non-concurred with that recommendation in particular, which as Brian said, that's not something typically that they do. So I think it's pretty significant that EPA disagreed, Energy non-concurred with the recommendation. And in general, I'll just say that Ecology has had some concerns with GAO reports that don't take into account legally binding agreements that we have that set the pathway for cleanup, including the tri-party agreement and the court-ordered consent decree that we have with the Department of Energy. So that's where, you know, our comments get appended to the report. Recommendations from the GAO historically for Hanford haven't changed. So that's why I call it just not.
Thank you for that. Okay, so one more.
Can I take a 30-second
comment?
30-second tangent? Not related to Hanford, but related to our team. We also, on October 27th, delivered the state's energy security plan. A couple days ahead of schedule. Max and I were among the 3 people who helped write it. So check it out and let us know if you have questions. September 27th. It was due October 1st. No, it's due September 30th. Months are hard.
Thank you for mentioning that. It's a great effort by our team. It's good value for the state. The other half of our job for nuclear safety is energy security, broadly speaking, fuels resiliency, that kind of thing. That report addresses those issues.
So in case anyone hadn't noticed, we kind of transitioned into board business quite a long time ago. And the next item on here, Maddie had a couple slides to tell us about our trip to the waste isolation pilot plant. Matt, can you bring those up?
I'm working.
Got your best people working on it?
Yeah.
I didn't say. I went to a bunch today.
Oh, that's good. That was, I didn't share. How will you move to long? Yeah, what I think must be. How things good.
The bandwidth can get a little laggy here, so.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, so it hasn't been labeled.
Yeah, we should.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Sure. Maddie, you should.
Yeah, I can just
Go
talk
ahead and start
talk
talking.
about it. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so like 6 of us went to visit WIP in Carlsbad, New Mexico on September 12th. And the purpose is really just to see where the true waste is stored, just to observe components of the process and also observe the mine, which was by far the most interesting part. One thing, some notable things just on the journey there. On our trip there, we were driving through miles of oil fields during the sunrise. So as the flares were coming up, they kind of looked like birthday candles. It was very, very weird and ominous. You try. The destination did not register on Google or Apple Maps, so we just had to follow Matt's just innate direction skills. And then when we
It's a wonder world live.
yeah, and we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. Yeah. So when we got there too, the air quality outside was so poor that you could almost chew it. An interesting thing is we mentioned it to the employees there, they're like, "What are you talking about?" They didn't notice it at all because they're so accustomed to it. So
Yeah, that's what's classic oil field air pollution, you know, with heavy NOx,
Oh,
SOx.
yeah. The sky was a different color. So, and then what you see up here, I know it's too hard to see, but a fun fact, WIP has some of the highest Google reviews I've ever seen. Nearly every single review is 5 stars. They roll in pretty regularly. And it's stuff like, I go every year to have my glow in the dark highlights recharged. The live action Call of Duty Zombie was great, 10 out of 10 would recommend. So they're all kind of,
I'm sensing an internet meme or something
It's
that we don't know.
people are heavily trolling their Google reviews, and that was just an interesting fact. So go to the next slide. So when we were entering, this is a picture of one of our guides, Lobby St. John. Yep. And then Rainice, they were our 2 guides. They're members of the WIP communications team. We spent an hour of safety training. We wore PPE, which included catalytic converters and rebreathers on our belts, and we had some identification tags as well. We went 1,150 feet down to mine via the Kibby lift, which is bells for communication, which had significant evidence of corrosion, I might add. We'll get to later. Also, there are some liars in this room because not all caves are 56 degrees. It's very hot down there. So if you go, wear like short sleeves. We'll go to the next slide. So this is a map of the different panels. Not important to really see the details, but just imagine that once we went down 2,000 feet, we were on this little kind of golf cart thing, driving through these corridors in pitch black. It's really interesting. I don't have my handwritten notes, but I believe we were in panel 7, which is that kind of green part in the middle right there. Go to the next slide. So this is a cute picture of all of us. Some key learnings, but not comprehensive. So the panels, as a lot of you probably know, are mined shortly before use as the salt is always moving and caving in. This was really severe. In the picture, everything looks nice and square. You actually can't find pictures online. Most of the rooms you go into are like severely caving in and are quite scary to be in. And you can see they're constantly trying to reinforce them. So that was very sketchy and shocking when you first saw it. Another interesting thing we learned is that while WIP doesn't use rail tracks were initially installed by Minnesota engineers who didn't account for the high average temperatures in New Mexico, not sure how. So obviously when you install steel at a lower temperature and it gets really hot, it expands. So the train tracks buckled very quickly and were not usable. Which is fine because true packs aren't even designed for rail, as they have a time limit. And rail is not always on time. So they talked about rail will never be a method of transportation there. We did learn that there have been some road accidents during the transport, and the true packs just rolled off into a ditch as designed. The accident was caused by the driver having a heart attack.
Shelley can talk to that. Shelley.
No, not the truth.
Not the truth.
We did have an
I guess I'm
accident
not
out in this
understanding.
area. It was radioactive and not a true shot.
Yep. Great. So go to the next slide. We got a really comprehensive review of the whole process from when they receive the true packs and how they kind of mechanically go about opening it with machines, depressurizing and checking for leaks and checking for quality. They do reject shipments, and we got to see how that then goes into the elevator and goes down. We've got debriefing in that whole process as shown in this picture here. Now, some claims made by our guides, I call them claims because I'm not sure if they're factual or not. One of them I saw Mike shaking his head like he was unsure. They said salt will collapse and make a gas tight seal on the waste. Not.
That is not true. The salt is mechanically very weak. That's why it keeps wanting to fall in. It has what's called a tensile strength of 232 pounds per square inch. If you look at their own document, they show that over time, the open chambers are going to collapse down onto the enclosed materials. And the air, whatever other gases are in there. Once the pressure in that room goes over 232, the fractures on the top of the roof are going to open. That gas is going to come up and out. Now, is there going to be continual communication down that fracture? No, because the salt will float up behind it. But there's something down there producing a lot of radon or other gas. It's going to come up and out somewhere.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, just watching everyone, everyone in the room is very knowledgeable, bringing their different backgrounds and expertise. I particularly enjoyed watching Mike's face and some of their comments. One of the things that I found interesting was I asked about how they made it to corrosion. I mean, sulfide, solvent electrolyte, or causing electrolyte reactions. They were like, oh yeah, corrosion's not an issue, we just keep it really dry down here, which is very humid and very hot, so I'm not sure how that's possible.
Oh, no. It was very.
Okay,
And that's part of the, that's part of the proof.
Sure.
Why it's not gas tight, the exposed, potassium salts
sure.
pull water out of the air. That's why you had that little
Okay,
fluorescence on the
fair.
wall.
I did find it interesting though that there was evidence of corrosion on like the entire
Absolutely.
tibia lift, and they were having to constantly. So that's interesting. Yeah, so those were some of the interesting takeaways. I think it would have been probably when you talk about your trip to the Navy Yard and how you had some directors of operations who are actually, I think it would have been nice to have some experts like that join us in the tour rather than just having to communicate. They were very knowledgeable. It would be nice to have that expertise. That's it.
Okay, thank you. We got a couple other things that we need to cover, bylaws next. And yeah, we don't have time for more Q and A first. We have a hard stop at 1:30 for public comment. So,
Well, all right, so, what's favorite topic, bylaws? So last time we had, gone over proposed changes to bylaws. I don't know, I think we need to like vote to adopt them, I think is the idea. We, can go over what proposed changes were again and to be discussing. The most important change as far as I'm concerned was that we, before it said that we, that the board could write letters, but didn't really sort of say what kinds of things, and also didn't have any process for how we would agree. It just said, that it would be authorized by majority of the board, but there was nothing around how that would work. Like, would we all get the chance to read it and then argue with each other and send it around, or we just vote, and if we voted down, that was the end of it. So can I interject? So please.
So we had the discussion and Tom and Stephen led the rewrite of the new bylaws. And I don't know that the rest of the board has had a chance to even look at that version since May. We didn't give the feedback consensus before Max and I can take it to get review for legal sufficiency. We want to have a version that everybody said, yep, we looked at it. There's no more comment that needs to be made. So if I need to send that back around so we can have a period of time to say, we've looked at it, we're okay with this version, that'd be great, because that's kind of the loose end that we didn't clean between May and now. So really, we're kind of at that point with the work that Stephen and Tom did to say, this is where it's at, so then Max and I can approach DOJ to say, please take a quick peek, as Senator Hansel and our other legislators said, you need to make sure you look at, got legal sufficiency before you do that.
So so the proposal is that we give the board into the month, is that too soon?
You need 2 weeks. What do you need, folks?
2 weeks?
The proposed language around, comments from the board includes a 14-day period of all this getting.
So this will be the test.
Let's see if 14 days is enough, here, and if after 14 days we're going, no, I still need more time, that maybe we want to up that number for letters before too.
So if there are no comments after 14 days, we will do this. The assumption, if everyone here agrees to it, is that the board agrees to move forward with this version.
For getting review from.
Yes. Yeah.
The actual lawyers.
And then Max and I can report back if there was anything that we got advice to change, correct, and et cetera. But I will send it out tomorrow back again to the group, just and leave it on at 14 days and say, everybody good with this version? And if we get that, then we'll go from there. Does that sound okay? Yes. And if there are any major changes, we'll implement another 14-day rule. Is everybody okay with that?
Plan, all right. Thank you. You got a copy of the file. Okay, yes, email it to me.
Okay.
I got.
Two more things on the agenda. Mark, can you talk about board vacancy? Sure, and welcome again to Esteban, who officially signed the last of the paperwork today, so he is officially on board, so welcome to the Oregon Hanford team on board.
6 years.
What's that?
6-year commitment.
It's an 8-year commitment.
The tattooing is gonna happen after.
One more, yes, we'll play the secret handshake. We have some vacancies coming up. Laura, your position will term out in February. And then I don't know if Tom Roberts is online as our public safety rep from Northeast Oregon, but he will term out by the next summer. So those are the two. And then we have one open position right now currently, which people can apply for through Workday. And then, of course, any other interested folks that we hear about can also go to Workday and apply. So that's where we're at. And then, of course, the legislators will let us know too, how they're going to fill the vacancies from the House and the Senate representatives too. So, with that, I would just remind folks too, a lot of you don't keep track of when your terms end. We try to, but if your intent is on the end of your first term, or you're coming to that you want to seek reappointment, please let Max and I know so we can start that process before. The sooner we go through those cycles and get those appointments done. Your non-Senate appointments, you're appointed just by the governor.
Mark and I mentioned that, or you are eligible for another term.
So historically, this board has had representatives from the positions of social responsibility. The last one was Susan Katz, who left the board about a year ago. And so we're in discussions with them, and they do have someone who's interested in joining the board. And so at some time in the very near future, we're going to sit down with one or more of people from that group and talk to them about this board and the goals and responsibilities. So we are actively recruiting. Yes, and just to clarify, so there are statutory positions on this board. Positions for social responsibility is not. But we have, from Josh Howison and from Susan, we've had great representation from that group. So I appreciate Jeff getting that contact out there, because we've always thought if we were going to ever look at groups that we would like to be in position on this board, that's one that we would like to talk to, see if they would like to have a permanent seat at the table.
For knowledge of the members of the public, the statutory seats are Confederate Tribes of Yucatan Indian Reservation and a Northeast Oregon Public Safety, that makes sense?
Yeah, along with water resources and OGO.
Water Resources, Department of Energy. I think those are, and then the governor's office. Yeah, statutory, and then the senators and representatives as well.
Yes. Senator Hansel, did you want to bring something up too?
Yeah, I just want to, Jeff, maybe this would be the time I want to say before we adjourn. I look around the room, I think I've been on this board longer than anybody's here, but in fact, I know I have, but from members, I think Marcel, the one from the staff is still here. At the same outside. I grew up on a wheat and cow ranch, north of a little town of Athena, where I still live. it was 30 years in Phillip County Commissioner. And we did a lot of work because being downwinder and this type of thing, we were actively involved in different Hanford things. So when I ran for the office, of state senator and started January 13th, this is one of the opportunities I had to serve beyond just the thing, being in the legislature. And because of my district, now is 17,000 square miles, second largest Senate district in the state of Oregon. They start at the Hills Canyon and go all the way to the crest of the Cascade, with the exception of the Dalles, which is kind of, they went east when they're redistricting in the year 2000. But everything else around here is in District 29, which is what I represent. So we have practically the entire downwinder population in the state of Oregon. And it's been there near in my heart. So I just want to stay on this, and I'm gonna, I've already mentioned to my successor, who has secured both the Democrat and the Republican nomination from the county commissioner of Enterprise, Todd Nash, that this would be something like this. But it's been a real joy and fun to be on it and learned a lot.
And we've appreciated you being here and you've been very active and we're grateful for that.
This will be my last meeting because I did not run for reelection. And so, on January 13th, my position, my term of office ends. So, I'm in the process of wrapping up and then the following step out of my office in Salem because I gotta be out of it by the 13th of September. So they begin to get it all fixed up for those that are coming in. But it's been a great run. It's been very educational and I appreciate the opportunity to serve in this way.
We certainly appreciate it. And we do have a couple of openings on the board as members of the public.
Especially ones with domain expertise and policy and information. So.
So, who knows? People ask me what I'm gonna do, and I said, well, I'm not sure yet, but I think my wife has a long list of stuff I'm supposed to do. But anyway,
So, how has this board changed over the time you've been on it? And any thoughts on the direction we should be taking in the future?
one thing, in a long time, I think if I ever wanted, looking for a lifetime of job security, it would be Hanford cleanup. Yeah. The legacy there, the things, but I think the thing that, always seems to me, something will happen. The tank, things that were unanticipated over the past years. The whole scientific world comes together, construction, everything. And it takes a while, it's kind of burdensome, there's a lot of give and take and but almost without exception, something was found how to begin to mitigate it, how to work with groundwater and stuff. I'm probably one of the few people that way back when they were looking for deep storage areas, when they began to move in that direction, they actually had Rattlesnake Mountain on the depot and they dug down and they went out, I'm probably one of the few people actually were in those tunnels, Rattlesnake Mountain on Hanford. But the salt fractures too easy and they discovered that, these different layers of the salt. It was not, it was too easy for water penetration plus the movement of the ground. So it never went anywhere. But so things would be tried, didn't work. I was particularly impressed today again with the impact that this has on the first presentation economically to the whole region. This is one of our economic engines. I really have, but even in Oregon, I just went through prostate cancer treatment for the second time. And I'm very thankful that they got it and it's gone. St. Caroline Hospital, which is right there in the Tri-Cities. So we in Northeast Oregon are affected also. It's just not within the state of Washington that has the economic impact. There's contractors and permits in place that are electricians and pipe fitters that choose to live in Oregon, but they work in Hanford. So that impact is by state for sure, although most of it's probably is in Washington. The river, I mean, it's the Columbia River, that's on board with all of this. Once it comes to McKinney County, historically, we've got one of the major tribes, like C2R. We're the first place in Umatilla County where the Oregon Trail and the Lewis and Clark Trail come together. And so there's just history, there's all sorts of things here. So that's, we've got to make it work. We've got to take care of this legacy waste. And as we began to work on it, find it. We had a similar thing at the Army Depot in Umatilla County, all during my county commissioner days, where we stored 11% of the nation's chemical weapons. It's really easy to there's some parallels to it. The problem is that the waste or the weapons or whatever with radioactivity lasts a lot longer. The chemicals dissipate real easy and real quickly. So we did a big incineration project there, but a lot of the same issues, we had to figure out ways to do it safely. So in fact, the whole nation's arsenal was destroyed that way. So I think we've got the ability, working together, figuring out the solutions. I think this board plays, keeps people on their toes, people are watching, interaction, selecting, soliciting responses and stuff. So it's an important mission that we have to do. But a lot of the issues, I think the thing that remains the same is that when we've got a problem, we're just not sweeping it on the table. We're trying to figure out how to make it. And also not exception.
Thank you. So I think we have 2 minutes if there's no further board business. Next meeting. Oh, next meeting, thank you, it'll be virtual. Next meeting will be virtual. Last year it was in January, right? Yes. Did you have a proposed date? Mark, third week? Fourth week?
You can look at the third week, that'll be well after the holidays.
Right, so that's the week, Sunday is the 22nd of January. Is there a? I'm sorry.
19th or the 22nd.
Yeah.
What's the legislative session that starts?
Well, that's a good point.
So we've got this Houston.
Uh,
15th, maybe?
I have this 15, 16.
But
First virgin. So
It's probably, it's probably not that big a deal if legislators were there at that meeting anyway. Because they're getting ready for session and there's anything that we would bring. Yeah.
So the week of the 20th? That would be great.
Yeah, it's that Monday. Monday's an okay day. Okay.
Yeah, Monday's a holiday.
Yeah, maybe it's a holiday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, see.
I cannot do Wednesday.
Tuesday, the 21st.
I checked. Public comment.
Okay. So right now it's Tuesday, the 21st.
Yep, I'll set that out as an outlook.
Okay,
We'll develop an agenda before we get to.
okay, we are now open for public comment. Is there anyone in the room or online that would like to make a public comment?
There is nothing in chat and we have, excluding Sarah Gorsuch, we have
3 public members.
So did we have any questions in chat from earlier today, like during Brian Manson's?
Well, we were fortunate that one of the members asked the question. So that was answered.
And the other was just clarification on the rusty drums.
And Senator, of course, they want to address the board and if they have anything to we had the meeting.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to congratulate my colleague in his retirement. And thank you all for a good discussion today.
Thank you.
Dan Solitz is in the queue. Dan, if you unmute yourself, you're free to ask your questions.
Alrighty, thank you. Good meeting today. I have a concern that I'd like to have the board take a long-term look at, and that's with the high-level waste glass treatment plant that's being designed and constructed in Washington at the Hanford site. Department of Energy doesn't have a really good history with these kinds of projects. The MOX facility, which was to take the I think it was 60 metric tons of surplus weapons plutonium and turn it into fuel to put into reactors. The Russians were doing that. We agreed with the Russians that we would do something with ours, tried to design a facility to make that fuel, and it just didn't work. And I suspect that the high-level glass plant is sort of the same kind of beast. They had trouble with it before. They had trouble with criticality, hydrogen, corrosion, and erosion. And I don't know that they've even solved those problems. They are getting rid of the closed-off cells that you could never get into. So that's a step in the right direction. But I think we need to pay attention to the construction of that, the design around it. We need to get as much detail as we can. They're not really good at providing details. Right now at the low-level VIT plant, they're having trouble trying to blend or mix the glass with the simulant. And if they have a trouble mixing the glass fit with simulant, they're really going to have a trouble mixing the water with the simulant, with the glass frit. So I know that the DOE doesn't want to get into detail, but I think we need to force them into detail so that they can listen to themselves and try to figure out better ways to do things, because the low-level plant has been delayed. The low-level glass plant has been delayed several times. It's way beyond their original hot commissioning date. So if we could keep a close eye on the high level, I think we're better served in the long term. Thank you, and thanks for coming to the meeting. Appreciate everybody's hard work.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
I confirm that January 21st is the first day of the legislative session. That affects anybody's considerations on our next meeting.
As I understand it, we agreed with the Russians that we would not use.
That's,
never mind, sorry.
Okay, if there are no further public comments or additional board business, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you.
Thanks all.
So that's why I
don't have the bylaw.
Next time you use on-site.